I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker today. Deborah is a longtime friend. I will share with you that our boards invested in sending 11 Local First Arizona staff members to Boston about a year ago to participate in a sustainability conference where Deborah was the speaker. And she was one of many, many speakers who were there. And when we came back and debriefed, it emerged that Deborah was by far our team's favorite and most inspiring speaker. She's a founding partner of the Boston Impact Initiative, an impact investing fund focused on economic justice, which means investing in opportunity for all people, especially those most oppressed or abandoned by our current economic system. She encourages them to lead a dignified and productive life, and the fund takes an integrated capital approach, combining investing, lending, and giving to build a resilient and inclusive local economy. Deborah and I are longtime friends. We met through an organization called BALLE, which is an acronym BALLE, which stands for the Business Alliance of Local Living Economies. Deborah is also a longtime author. She co-authored a book called Walk Out, Walk On, which is an award-winning book that profiles pioneering leaders who walked out of organizations failing to contribute to the common good and walked on to build resilient communities. She also founded the Old Oak Dojo, which is an urban learning center in Boston. Please help me welcome Deborah Frieze.
Thank you, Kimber. I'm guessing most of you already know that Kimber is like an unbelievable hero, not just here, but nationally. So there's like a mutual fan club going on where people know what's going on in Arizona because of Kimber. I also want to thank all of you for moving into the shade. I only recently stopped diving into snowbanks with my puppy. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I can take on this challenge, I think. But I really appreciate that we're here right now. And another thing I appreciate is one of the things that I love about hanging out with food and farming people is that, like me, you're all a bunch of systems thinkers, right? When your attention is on things that blossom and grow and thrive and die, you understand that living systems are fundamentally complex, right? Unpredictable, and at times even chaotic. Which is why for many of us, when we look at industrial agriculture, it can seem sometimes unnatural, right? It's not, it's built around the false belief or a partial belief that the world is causal, linear, and predictable like a machine. Now, when you're working with machines, it makes sense to maximize them for extraction, productivity, and accumulation, but nature is nothing like a machine. Natural systems, right, living systems, are complex, emergent, and unpredictable, and every system we humans participate in is a living system. And that includes our financial systems, which we're going to talk about today, which, like with industrial agriculture, have been designed to maximize extraction, accumulation, and infinite growth, which are not things that you actually find in nature. So the question I want to explore this morning is what happens if we bring our innate living systems mindset to food and finance, right? And then one of the things that I've learned over the past 15 years as a student of living systems thinking is that it is the nature of living systems to self-organize around a set of values and beliefs, right? So if we're interested in supporting a shift from food and finance systems that self-organize around extraction to food and finance systems that self-organize around regeneration, then we're going to have to challenge the beliefs we hold as entrepreneurs, as investors, and as supporters of those systems around profit, growth, efficiency, ownership, and returns, the values around which most of our systems have been organizing. So I'm guessing that many of you are here today because you're seeking to build and grow and support food and farming businesses that restore local ownership, right? Embrace sustainable practices, provide equitable employment, and help generate thriving local communities. You're probably devoting the vast majority of your waking hours, right, to making these regenerative local enterprises thrive. And yet, when it comes to financing those businesses, you're likely facing an array of extractive financial institutions and investors who claim a right to profit off of your hard work without having to lift a finger. That's the nature of the finance system. So as an investor, I spend a lot of time with local economy entrepreneurs listening to their dreams and challenges. And the one complaint I hear more than any other is that they can't find the capital that they need at the terms that they want. They can't find angel investors, or the angel investors they find won't bet on them. The banks say they don't like their credit histories. The venture capitalists kind of want to claim your firstborn if you get venture capital, right? So the response from local economy entrepreneurs is they keep beating their heads against the same brick walls, trying to make better pitches, forecast faster growth, and offer bigger returns. All right, so this is the problem that we have. And I believe a cornerstone of the problem is that we're trying to finance regenerative local enterprises still using extractive capital. So there's a mismatch there. And I'd like to share a picture that I think helps explain this mismatch. The map I'm about to show you comes from systems thinking, and is a way, I believe, of helping us understand the uniqueness of the time that we're in which there are massive shifts happening at a systemic level. And we have to start to understand these with a complexity lens. They're highly complex emergent phenomenon that we're dealing with, and we need to take a complex emergent approach to understanding change. So, all change, this is the systems view, all change rises and peaks and moves into decline. That's just the nature of a system, whether it's an ecological system or a technological system or a political system. That's just a life cycle of change. And at some point, that's usually around the peak, signs of turbulence appear, right? There's disruptions in supply or spikes in demand or volatility in pricing. And usually around that time is when we start to see alternatives to the dominant system begin to appear. So I call these alternatives walkouts, each of these little yellow dots. They're people who are turning their back on the dominant system, eager to be free to experiment with creating something new. Now, if they remain isolated from one another, nothing happens, right? The dominant system will crush, absorb, or co-opt the pioneers simply because every living system is inclined towards self-preservation. There's no moral judgment about this. This is just, this system is inclined to preserve itself. If this is a threat, its effort is crush it or co-opt it and engage it. But if these walkouts get connected to one another and start exchanging meaningful information and learning, then their separate efforts can suddenly emerge as a powerful system capable of disrupting the old order and giving birth to something new. So before I give you any examples of this, does anything come to, we're going to make this a little interactive because it's more fun that way. Does anything come to mind? Does anybody see any shifts happening that you think map to this system picture? Cryptocurrency. So what's going on with cryptocurrency?
Bitcoin and then blockchain, all kinds of blockchain too.
So yeah, so she's saying cryptocurrency. So we have, call this, currency is a fiat-based interest-bearing currency. A government releases a currency, it has interest on it, that's currency, and then you don't see the big banks inventing that currency, right? It came from outside. So all the alternatives, Bitcoin, all the different cryptocurrencies, and now there's more learning and relationship, and it's accelerating. We are probably somewhere here in the life cycle. It hasn't accelerated yet. It's early in the life cycle. Any other places where you see this change?
How about Me Too?
The Me Too movement. What do you want to say about that?
Well, it's just women were always they weren't very strong when they acted as single voices, but when they coalesced, then suddenly things started happening.
Okay, so if this is a, let's call it, I'll keep it fairly straightforward and not get too into politics if I can. Again, I'm from Boston, I'm in Arizona, so that's interesting. So let's say this is tacit acceptance of harassment, and then an individual voice comes up, it's taken care of. An individual voice come up, it's taken care of. As soon as there's connectivity across the voices, some new power shows up that's disrupting the tacit nature of harassment. Okay, one here? Agritopia.
If you go through a typical neighborhood in the East Valley, there's these vanilla, same houses, 3 houses, over and over again with the drainage basin park, and it's just the same thing over again from here to here. So we look here and there's a community, there's church, There's elderly housing, there's farm, it's school, it's an entire community of people that is facilitating community between people.
Okay, so I'm guessing not everybody heard that, but pointing out the difference between a kind of development that doesn't have integrated systems in it, that's just a certain type of housing development, to agritopia, where you've got multi-generational housing, you've got farming, you've got churches, everything is integrated in place, so it's a different form. So one of the things about this map is it can be at any level of scale. It can be really micro, like we're just looking at a neighborhood. It can be macro, we're looking at a global phenomenon. So it's also pretty good for looking at food and farming in this country, right? So let's say, 40 years ago, no one was really talking about local and organic agriculture. It wasn't that it didn't exist, it just wasn't what we were talking about. And unless you grew it yourself, most of us were eating the products of industrial agriculture. That's what's dominated this country, unless you were growing it yourself, for most of our lifetimes. But as that system began to peak, right, as crops began to require, in industrial agriculture, as crops began to require increasingly toxic and expensive inputs to produce the same yields, walkouts began to experiment with local and organic agriculture. And as the efforts of these many healthy food pioneers became stronger and more visible, people began to abandon the old system and leap onto the new one. That's one of the things about this system curve, and we may get into this later in Q&A or not, but it's very difficult to transform this system. It's a discontinuity because it's organized around a set of values and beliefs. So when you start to accelerate that, there's actually the skyrocketing numbers that we see today of CSAs, of farmers markets, of local food enterprises, of food finance happening to support local food enterprises, we're starting to move along this curve. And we see the same phenomenon happening again and again, from fossil fuel to renewable energy, where if you go to Iceland, you're at 100% renewable energy. Like here, we're still in the struggle, right? But it's possible, right? Or from conventional architecture to green building, or my favorite topic of finance. So I would call this system, yes, there's judgment here. I would call this system Wall Street casino capitalism, right? Or the extractive economy, or what one of my mentors, David Corton, calls the dying suicide economy. And it's organized around the values of profit maximization, resource extraction, growth, and efficiency, all measured through quarterly returns, right? In that system, the accumulation of money is at the center of what the system is organizing around. So now there's an alternative emerging, which you might call the regenerative economy, the local living economy, the solidarity economy, and it's organized around the well-being of people and place. And that system is designed to encourage the flow of resources rather than the accumulation, storage, and hoarding through the whole system, through people in their place. Right, so we're seeing this series of phenomena, and by the way, I think the time that we're living in, something that I call the trembling. We're past the peak of a lot of systems. A lot of our systems are in chaos. The emergent systems are not established yet. We're in this discontinuous place where what we've been doing in the industrial age is not working as well as it used to. It's certainly not working for all of us. And the alternatives are not robust enough yet. They're in prototyping, they're piloting, they're experimenting, they're failing. So we need both. So this is not to throw industrial agriculture under the bus, because if we look at, if everyone abandoned this system and leapt onto this one, that would be a disaster globally. We need this kind of food production to support the transition. So we need both. But we also need to think about what are the values around which the system that we wish to help create are organized. And so I want to point out sort of what's underneath all of this. What is the root belief set that's having this set of systems be turbulent and this set of systems coming up as an alternative? And I call this a shift from an economics of separation to an economics of relationship. So in the economics of separation, this is a little bit like the narrative of the American dream, right? We are all self-focused, rugged individualists. Our biological reality is survival of the fittest. Right? Competition is humanity's natural state. So there are those of us that are smarter and work harder and therefore earn what we gain. And there are others who are lazy and less capable and they need our help, and that's what philanthropy is for, right? And among other things. And he who wins gets to accumulate. And nature is here to serve our needs and support our growth. Okay, I don't want to suggest that this is false. It's not false. It is true of who we are, but it's only part of who we are. It's part of who we are. There's more to us than this. And the problem that we have is when we believe this is all of who we are, is we get what we've got, which is a global system of haves and have-nots with an ever-widening gap between the two. So I'm not here to say we're not competitive, we're not rugged individualists, but what's the part that's missing? Who else are we also? So what if instead of being fundamentally selfish, separate, and competitive, we are by nature cooperative, generous, and interdependent, right? So studies from the Greater Good Science Center show that if you give a person resources, they're likely to give away more than 50% right off the bat. That who we are as a species is hyper-connected, interdependent, and engaged in the interests of others. Our brains, right, this is also in the brain science, our brains are wired to feel one another's joy and pain. So when my pain center lights up, your pain center lights up. And when your joy center lights up, my joy center lights up. We are connected. So if we understand that the other way that we also are is fundamentally interdependent, we're concerned for the well-being of all, not just the few of us. We want to cooperate, we seek to cooperate. Resources flow rather than accumulate. So again, I use nature as my model. We turn toward nature for her wisdom. So when resources accumulate in one place in nature, that's often called stagnation, right? A healthy ecosystem is one in which resources are flowing through all of it. So here's the question. What does it look like for us as entrepreneurs and investors to shift from an economics of separation mindset to an economics of relationship? So I want to come back to this picture because I think the answer has everything to do with these little yellow dots and more importantly the lines in between them. So in the economics of separation, investors are looking to find the single best node in the map that they can and support it in crushing the competition so they can extract financial value. So in the economics of relationship, we're not only interested in a single node on the map, but we're interested in the relationships between the nodes. So author and systems thinker Marjorie Kelly says, we can no longer participate in a myth that investing is about looking for deals, right? The industrial worldview looks at investing as a product. The systems worldview asks, who else is here, right? And as entrepreneurs and investors, we need to place ourselves in an ecosystem of relationships. So I know sometimes I've been told as a speaker that I overstate things and am provocative. So if I'm provoking you in any way, so be it. We can navigate that in some time toward the end. But I also invite you to just try on some of this thinking, right? So we're dealing with closely held belief systems that are in our innermost wiring. And when light is shed on that and can be uncomfortable, you don't have to agree, but sort of explore the ideas that are here and let those settle a bit. So 5 years ago, I asked the question, what would happen if instead of money, we put relationship at the center of our investing strategy? What would it look like to invest in an economic system that self-organized around the well-being of people and place? And that's when I started the Boston Impact Initiative that Kimber named. So we are a place-based impact investing fund with a focus on economic justice. I want to repeat what that is. It means we create opportunity for all people, especially those most oppressed or abandoned by our current economic system, to lead a dignified and productive life. We are a $10 million charitable loan fund, which means that we can deploy what I call integrated capital, which I'm going to talk about, equity, debt, and grants, and everything in between across all sectors in our place. And the reason that we decided to be place-based is, again, from the systems thinking view, which is most of our chronic social problems are fundamentally interconnected, right? So if you look at a place and you see difficulty, you'll find a poor diet leads to poor performance in school, which leads to chronic unemployment, which leads to crime and recidivism, which leads to unstable housing and so forth. right? So which of those problems do you want to carve off? We think because of the interconnectedness of them, we need to deal with the complexity of the whole. And it's so complex, it's helpful to shrink the geography. So let's deal with the level of complexity that we can deal with, which is back home in my place. And I want to say something about my place, which is this: we're the #1 most unequal city by income in the country. And what that looks like is that the median net worth for a white family in Boston, that's total assets minus total debt, is $247,000. And for a black family, it's $8, right? So now imagine that you are a black entrepreneur trying to get your business off the ground in Boston. It takes $30,000 on average of bootstrapping. And that's not an option, because not only doesn't your own household have wealth, but it's a very segregated city. So your communities and your schools, that's also dealing with the same profile. And one of the things is that we are an outlier in terms of being #1, but we're not an outlier for what's going on in the nation. So this is the wealth gap nationally. So this line up here is white household wealth, hovering just north of $100,000, peaking and coming back down after 2007, coming down a bit. And the blue line is black household wealth, and the green line is Latino household wealth, which over here is $1,700 and $2,000. And a report recently came out that by 2053, black households will have net zero wealth, and by 2073, Latino households will have net zero wealth. And that's before any policy changes have occurred. So that's where we're headed. And by the way, we're also headed toward, by 2044, being majority minority country. So that's an economic apartheid perspective, right? That's where we're headed if we don't change the way we think. And it's not just wealth, it's also income. And by the way, this is not who we are as a country. This is a recent phenomenon. So this shows back in 1980, the poorest folks, the lowest income percentile, the poorest folks saw the highest income growth, 3+%. The wealthiest folks, the 99th percentile, saw the lowest growth, a little bit, like maybe 1.3% or so. Okay, by 2014, we have the lowest income folks seeing negative growth. And we have here the 99th percentiles at 2+, the 99.99th percentile is at 4. The 99.999th percentile is up at 6% growth. So this is not who we've been, it's who we've become recently, and it's something that we can do something about. So I know that our demographic in Boston is different than yours, but the question is the same, right? Who in our place is being excluded from economic opportunity? Right? And how do we build and invest in enterprises that correct that? If we're wired to feel one another's joy and pain, then we actually care about who has access to safe schools, good jobs, and healthy food, and we can make investments and build enterprises that express that commitment. So I want to share a story about an enterprise in Boston that in the economics of separation never would have gotten off the ground. They are those folks that have that $8 of net worth. So for a moment, I want you to imagine that you're part of a group of Black and Latino low-income activist entrepreneurs with a big vision and a business plan for hauling and recycling organic waste. You have no personal savings. You have no collateral. You have no history of business operations. What's more, you've incorporated as a worker-owned cooperative, which means that you don't actually want to give up any equity in your business. Ultimately, you need to raise about $1 million over 4 years, and right now you're starting at zero. What do you do? Anybody want to invest in this business? Right? So conventional investors would say there is no way these guys are ever going to get their business off the ground. They should do something else. Thankfully, Cerro Cooperative did not turn toward conventional investors. This is what they did. So who was willing to give them a $60,000 grant for over 2 years to help them write their business, finish their business plan, and hire a startup manager. They then came to us, the Boston Impact Initiative Fund, and the Cooperative Fund of New England, a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution that supports co-op development. And they said, we need $20,000 to get some things started. And we looked at each other and were like, oh my God, we don't want to do this. And we were both too nervous about doing it, but we said, this is actually two values aligned with what we care about not to do it. So can we find our way into it? So we said, well, why don't we split it, first of all? We're going to do 0% because we don't actually think we're going to get the money back. And CFNE, they said to us, we're willing to convert your loan into a grant if they default, so it doesn't hit your default numbers. We're like, let's try that out. We're not confident, but let's try it. They then, because they're organizers, they were able to raise $17,000 on Indiegogo and crowdfunding, and that gave them the money they needed to file for a direct public offering. Has anyone heard of a DPO, direct public offering? Not very many people. Hey. So a direct public offering, instead of an initial public offering on the stock market that uses intermediaries of investment banks, a DPO is direct. It can be within the state or outside the state. Most of them are within the state, direct to consumers. So they went and they said, well, we are organizers, we're activists, we know how to do door knocking, we know how to get people excited about campaigns. And they went and they raised $340,000, this is a 4% dividend after 3 years, from the community, which put them in a position to buy their trucks, to secure contracts. And a little later, we were able to lead around with 4 other values-aligned impact investors of $325,000. Some of it was secured with collateral, some of it was unsecured. It had a floating interest rate, it had a vacation period. I know not everybody's a finance person in here, but all kinds of flexible capital happening in order to make this work. So today, Cero has 10 worker owners. They pay themselves $20 an hour. Half of them have been homeless, half of them have criminal records, half of them don't have high school degrees, and all of them are in full governance positions directing the growth of their own enterprise. They have full control and they're building assets, right? So that's the approach that we take with this integrated capital, where we're gonna need to layer philanthropy, we're gonna need to layer debt, we're gonna need to layer equity in there. We're gonna need to provide grants to for-profits, loans to nonprofits, patient equity for worker ownership transitions. And the reason is we have an inequitable economy and we need to use creative finance to fill the gap. It's not straight profit extraction if you want to deal with these issues of changing the system. And one thing also is that no single capital provider could have gotten Cero off the ground, right? We see our role as creating relationships throughout our ecosystem with the other investors and with the grant makers and with the technical assistance providers and of course the entrepreneurs, so we can break through some of the chronically stuck places that we find ourselves in, right? And in Cero's case, we bent over backwards because of how much they expressed the values that we cared most about, that thing about systems self-organizing around a set of values. So I want to show you what a map for us of restoring local productive capacity looks like. Now this is also our investment criteria, but I think of it as a broader way of understanding if I'm trying to rebuild a system in a place that includes those who've been left out and is taking care of the planet. What are all the things that I need to think about? So we look at, so if people heard of, first of all, people heard of impact investing? Again, a mix. So impact investing is saying instead of just investing for financial return, people talk about triple bottom line returns. I want to invest to get people, planet, and profit returns. Return on people means somehow community is faring better as a result of this investment. Return on planet is somehow the planet ecology is faring better. And profit is somehow I'm getting some money back out of it, right? So we have a little twist on that, which is instead of just people, we say economic justice. We have got to rebuild ownership. We have to build the asset base, the wealth of communities that have been disinvested, right? That we have to create meaningful livelihood opportunities, like wages that are living wages or a premium to living wages that have workforce development and training in them, that provide full benefits. Participation means the role of the worker's voice. So this is also about power. Who has power in directing the future of an enterprise and who doesn't? For planet, we don't only look at nature, so we are very concerned with ecological stewardship, zero waste, healthy soil, but also place, local production for local consumption. And relationships, moving from competition to cooperation. So not only am I in conversation with some of my competitors, I have healthy relationships with my suppliers, and I choose procurement practices that support the local, right? And that support ownership by folks that have been disinvested. And also, finally, instead of profit maximizing, how do we think about enterprise health, the vitality of the enterprise? Like, does the capital structure allow it to survive the unexpected changes that will come in that weren't in their plan? Is the leader like a heroic, I've got this, everybody leader, or is it a leader who's supporting the collective intelligence and creativity of folks in their organization? And does the organization support appropriate risk-taking and creativity? Right, so instead of thinking, the way that the economics of separation looks at investing is it's very specialized. So we say, I invest in green businesses, I invest in just businesses, or I invest in profit maximizing businesses. What we're trying to do in the economics of relationship is look for intersectionality, right? The place where ecological stewardship meets economic justice meets enterprise longevity. And so that's the type of view that we can take when we look at a single enterprise like Cero, which is like worker-owned, amazing jobs, well-paying, full governance, zero waste, bringing organic waste back into the food cycle, and a healthy enterprise. So that's what it looks like for a single enterprise. Now let's take a system thinking view of a portfolio of businesses. So one of the ways, again, as place-based investors and as systems thinkers, we like to map the inflows and the outflows of activity in our ecosystem. So in the case, this is what you're looking at is our food portfolio, food and farming portfolio. So we start with the growers, and in here we have a mix, we're urban, right? But we have a mix of for-profit, nonprofit, and cooperatives in here. Some are doing rooftops, some are doing greenhouse, some are doing urban vacant lot growing. We have the processors, a culinary incubator, and the manufacturers. We have the distributors, so we have a deli, we have a food caterer, a grocery store, and a provider to schools and childcare and elder care centers. Consuming through food trucks, catering, and cafes. And Cero, they're repurposing the waste, and these are all their clients. They're bringing all the waste back to the same growers. Right? And as systems investors, we want to invest in every part of that system. So usually in the economics of separation, we don't really get involved in the relationships between the enterprise. In fact, the opposite, we get concerned about competition and conflicts of interest. So maybe we don't want to be in the same sector, or we don't want to be invested in the supplier because that makes us vulnerable to them both going down. In the economics of relationship, we look for what my friend Don Schaefer at RSF Social Finance calls a confluence of interests, right? We want these businesses to be connected. We're unafraid of supporting competitors. We look for places to seek out their collaboration and co-creation. And so instead of mitigating risk through separation, like not having too many eggs in one basket, we're mitigating risk through creating stronger ties, more interconnectedness. And if we want to build a strong and resilient food system, we need to increase the number and strength of ties between the nodes. So let me give you just a few more examples of what happens when enterprises in a place see themselves as interdependent. So this is Commonwealth Kitchen. It was up in that processing corner. It's a nonprofit culinary incubator that provides shared kitchen space for small food-related businesses. They placed themselves in one of our most distressed neighborhoods, and that was in order to create opportunity for low-income entrepreneurs to own and build their own businesses. And they've since launched 120 or more wholesale, retail, catering, and food truck businesses. They've provided 350 jobs. 150 of those are from the local neighborhood. And the thing that gets most interesting about what they're doing is not just, here's our facility, we've got shared infrastructure. They keep looking for opportunities for cooperation. And that's everything from some of the businesses bringing each other to their events, but more significantly, things like creating opportunity for Whole Foods to purchase from all the vendors. So a lot of those small businesses would never get access, but Commonwealth Kitchen makes sure they do it together, they get them all placed. They have contracts with anchor institutions like Northeastern University and the government that does purchasing from the aggregate, where again, they wouldn't do independent contracts. They recognize that, oh, looks like a whole lot of our businesses all need tomato sauce. Maybe we can provide the tomato sauce and give it to everybody. And then the last one, the one that they added most recently that I love, is some of those businesses have a lot of spikes in when they need their workers and when they don't. So now the workers can float between these independent businesses, and Commonwealth Kitchen is ensuring that there's full and intelligent utilization of workers. So intelligent utilization of space, workers, procurement, and sales that they're doing across the whole. Now, one of the businesses that came out of Commonwealth Kitchen, which is one that I am so proud of because we've been with them since the beginning, is Fresh Food Generation, 2 youth workers that came out of one of the nonprofit growing groups called the Food Project, that started a cafe, a food truck, and a catering business that's committed to serving healthy local food inspired by Latin American and Caribbean cuisine. And it's providing food to underserved neighborhoods, also meeting the cuisine demands of some of those communities, and creating very meaningful livelihood opportunities for young workers of color in terms of workforce development. They are paying themselves well. They've got 9 employees. They're zero waste, and they are totally committed to local sourcing. They have 40% of their produce is locally sourced. I also wanted just to highlight, we won't get into as much detail on this, it does require integrated capital. So we gave them a grant of just $5,000 as they went through a business accelerator that was a conventional business accelerator. And we said, well, why don't we add a social business prize? So they got the $5,000 prize. Again, they turned to community and they raised $54,000 through crowdfunding. We gave them a $34,000 loan at 5% over 5 years to get their truck going. This is the one I want to point out though. Last year, they had a cash crisis. And we love them and we're committed to them. And we're like, okay, we're going to give you a short $11,000 loan. It was at 8% because we did it with another partner who won't go. We cap at 7%, but we did it 8% with another partner. And it was just a 1 year, let's just do this without a lot of thought to get you to this round of capital, which is a $50,000 line of credit and $250,000 of what's called self-liquidating equity, so that the entrepreneurs can take their equity back and own their enterprise. And part of the reason that I'm most excited about this business is because they exemplify the economics of relationship. So Cassandra and Jackson, like I said, they started out as youth workers at the Food Project. They're incubated at Commonwealth Kitchen. They carry 88 Acres bars and chocolate therapy chocolates on their food truck and in their cafe. They provide catering and product to City Feed, City Fresh. They have, again, their direct cafe and food truck, and now they've become a competitive catering business in the corporate environment. So they've upscaled to a viable player long-term in the city, and they always bring Sero when they have an event, right? So I'm like, yes, that's the kind of business. And when they get into trouble, what we do and they do is we call all of our friends and say, hey, can you hire me anytime soon? I'm having difficulty. Could you guys bring me to an event? I've been bringing you to events. You know, so could you guys bring me to an event? I've been bringing you to events. So that notion of having stronger ties by being more in relationship, more in cooperation. Okay, so I said we were going to have interactivity. So here's what's going to happen. I just gave you a lot of information. And so what I'd like to ask you to do is turn to a neighbor and have a conversation for about 5 minutes, and then we'll hear from folks. Where do you place yourself in the food system? Because you may not know who you're sitting next to, right? How tightly connected are you, right? And where do you see opportunities to strengthen ties? So let's start with that, and then we'll come back and hear from folks and dive into the rest of this in Q&A. Okay, so about 5 minutes. This is a Titanic. It's hard to move it, right? And so one of the things that we've learned in sort of mapping these big system changes is what are the roles that people inside big systems play versus the roles that people outside of big systems play. And one of the roles that we've talked about in big systems is what we call a protector. This is somebody who's in the big system, may have capital to direct, may have power and influence or policy to play with, and they're able to create the conditions that allow for the trailblazers to build more strength in learning as they go. So I was working with someone in government in Nova Scotia, and her main work was the Farm Bill, but she had a little bit of funds that she could siphon off to support another piece of work that was, how do we start bringing Nova Scotia local food from 5% to 15% supply? And so she could use her positional power and authority to direct a little bit of experimentation capital. So while we need these folks to function extremely well, because this is the system that we're all relying on right now. We also need them to partner with us in creating the conditions for more learning, more acceleration, and there's a lot of mentoring and technical assistance and other things that come out of here. So we should not see these as oppositional. We will never create big systems change if they're oppositional. So how do we create more relatedness? By showing up to each other's work, learning with each other, and not challenging the system and saying it's wrong, but inviting it to host more relatedness with what's emerging. So, yeah, right here.
Hi, my name is Kelly Athena, and my company is Cactus Kelly, and I'm a desert forager of wild edible plants. So I harvest ironwood nuts and make flour from that, and make roasted ironwood nuts that taste like corn nuts, and mesquite flour, which is really sweet, and dog treats and wolfberries and teas and all sorts of things. I've got like edamame. Have you ever had Palo Verde edamame? It tastes better than soybean edamame. And I don't know how to connect. I don't know how to scale up. I don't know, I know restaurants need me. I want to sell wholesale to people, and I don't have any connections yet.
So this is a perfect example. So I don't mean to presume, but that's not the connection that needs to happen right now, right? That's not, it's proximate, right? So I don't know if it's that guy or the coffee girl, it's who is most proximate to me in this ecosystem. Find those folks, and from there build out, and there build out, and there build out. But part of what happens, a lot of local economy entrepreneurs, they're like trying to get the attention of the biggest distributor, the most power, and it's like, wow, that's just not going to work, right? So it's like, how do you navigate the ecosystem of relationship and strengthen ties and strengthen ties and strengthen ties until you get connected to bigger systems?
So another thing that everyone should keep in mind is the Local First Arizona Foundation created a website called Good Food Finder AZ specifically for this reason. We're trying to create a platform that is a shared space. So I encourage you to look at it, see if we can get you connected on there, and we are looking to make it better every day. The website was funded by a combination of the Steele Foundation and USDA, who are both in the house today. And the whole idea is to create a portal that we can all share to create more relationships. So please look at it, and hopefully we'll be able to find good ways to connect people.
So that's an even better articulation of what we talked about. What is the role that the USDA plays in creating the conditions for that to happen? And you guys have an enormous asset here in Arizona and Local First, because what you're doing here and all the conversations gathering people that are in that divergent parts of the ecosystem, right? And a platform for continuing that conversation. There's already an ecosystem mindset in the roots of this work. But it's what happens is that can be there, but if you don't recognize that economics of separation wiring that most of us were raised in, which is I'm competitive and I'm trying to do my piece of the pie or make my piece of the pie bigger, to recognize that my success is interdependent with the other entrepreneurs in this room, in this space. And without that, we are not going to create a strong, healthy local food system in Arizona. And so that's part of the shifting into the inner work of moving from that competitive, selfish, and separate to interdependent and engaged in the interest of others and opportunity for all. Right? Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times.
Could you stand up so people can hear you?
I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but I'm I'm having a feeling that I'm absolutely in the right place at the right time. I walked out about 2 years ago, and for many of the reasons I think that you've articulated today, and you've just sort of taken me to the next level in terms of clarity, and I just want to say thank you.
You're very welcome. Happy to hear that. That's great. Yeah, right here.
So my name is Alicia. I own a company called Happy Pal. It's more local stores. And I'm not finding a co-packer. So right now I'm doing everything with the help of family, friends. And I need a co-packer. So if any of you guys are in the house, please come see me later to talk, because I can't get into stores if I'm doing it all myself.
Yep.
I need to lean on somebody else to help me out and do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and so that's again, I would say we ran into that with some of our manufacturing businesses, and several of them, now in our case, because they were in our portfolio and they knew each other, they said, we all have this problem and there isn't a good co-packer here that can meet our needs. How do we actually help convene a group of entrepreneurs that might start a co-packer? Or get connected to one that exists. So that's another piece. If you can't find the one that provides the service that you want, who else has your problem that can get together and maybe go to Local First and say, there's like 10 of us here, help us figure this out collectively. Yeah.
Joe Otto with the Department of Agriculture, Arizona. Understand that in systems theory, that loose system is already reacting. You're having smaller stores now. They started with bigger stores, and now it's, okay, we can't do that anymore because of this. They react to it, so you have Aldi's as doing with smaller stores. You have Safeway, Albertsons. Now their produce section is much different than it used to be. So what's happening is that system is reacting to what everybody here is doing. Okay? So here we have a reactive system. Now they're trying to be competitive using that competitive side to compete with you at the local level.
Yep.
So pricing becomes important, distribution becomes important. We've been to farmers markets, how many? 20 throughout the state. They are the thing. And that needs to grow because you have that interconnected connectivity that really occurs. But understand that system is reacting to you guys.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm not gonna, I don't actually have a judgment yet on, and I bet many of you do because you know more than I do about this, but is it of benefit or not? You can make a case on either side. There's a benefit when, you know, Walmart and Safeway and others have massive organic food in their distribution. There's also a cost because it is co-opting it into the same system, not the practices, right? So the practices are changing, but it is still in an extractive, accumulative mindset. So the benefit is more organic food is getting consumed. There's also a lot of pressure on organic growers that's causing some of the organic growers to lose some of their practices. So you have to look at what's happening. The dynamics here are fascinating and they're continually changing, but recognize that this system, by its nature, which is to preserve itself, these are not the individuals. These are large, complex systems that are made up of far more than the individuals who are leading them. Its nature is to preserve itself, and so if it sees little yellow dots, it's going to try and pull them in, right? And that may be of benefit, and it may be of cost. And so it's really critical. This is why you cannot get away from having the conversation around what are the values and beliefs around which this system is self-organizing, and what are the values and beliefs around which this system is self-organizing. If this is profit maximization, and this becomes profit maximization at any cost, it's just going to be part of this again. So we really, and if this is exclusionary in terms of who gets to build wealth, and this becomes exclusionary in terms of who gets to build wealth, it becomes part of this system again. It doesn't matter if you've got a few different practices. That's where we really have to hold our line and really understand who we're talking to, and you've got to get into the underlying belief set. Okay, I think we're going to take one last, we're good. We're good. That was my closing statement. I will be doing a breakout session, so if people want to dive into any more of this, we can do that. But thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.